What's up, guys, and welcome back to the Philosophical Misfit podcast. And I say welcome back, looking in the mirror at myself, not literally, because that'd be weird, but welcome back to myself, because it's been 2 weeks since I've done a podcast. Took a little break for the holidays. And speaking of the holidays, Happy New Year. So, glad we got that out of the way. Now, into the meat of it, into the podcast. So today what I want to talk to you about is an idea that came to me. It was about a month and a half ago when I posted on social media, decided to tell my friends and family up front. It took me 3 years to do it, but decided to tell my friends and family that I do not believe in God. It's been 3 years coming. And I mean, I've been at the same spot really for 3 years, like I've said and talked about many times, of just skepticism, doubting, atheistic, agnostic. I still don't have a label for what I am exactly and where I stand spiritually or non-spiritually speaking. But this is just the place that I have been in. And the reason why it took me 3 years, I think, has a lot to do with in my upbringing in church, in religious culture. It's probably my interpretation of this. But growing up in a church culture, and maybe some of you listening can relate, especially being a pastor's kid for me. When growing up in the church culture, and especially when like someone like myself who was on leadership, who preached some Sundays, who was on the worship team, who was a leader in a young adults group, someone who's very involved in the church. When something happens in your life, when something goes wrong, when you're in a rough emotional place, or if you messed up in some way, you had to. And this is where I get to my interpretation, because it's not like my parents taught me to do this. This is just what it appeared to me happened, and so this is what I did. Okay, something's wrong with you emotionally or spiritually, and so you have to hide that. You have to hide that hurt. You have to hide that pain. Talk about it with only a very, very select few people, and you don't, come out about whatever it is that you're going through until you're through it, until it's fixed, until the problem is solved. And then, come out and tell everybody about it, and it'll be a quote unquote testimony about the things that God has done in your life. And so when this whole deal hit me, I didn't outright say, this is what's happening, this is what's going on, to everybody, to friends and family, to everybody, because of that mindset, that systematic thinking that I guess in some ways I taught myself. I don't know how many other people felt this same way. I just know, I don't know how many other people have felt this same way. I just know that this is the way that I felt. This is how I interpreted things. So I recognize that this could be very subjective to me, but this is the reality of my situation. So when all of this hit me, I was like, okay, I need to back off, go in hiding. I immediately kind of stepped down. Well, I did step down, from being a worship team leader, and, I was like, I just need to take some time. People were like, what's going on? I was like, you know what? Might work itself out. I don't really know. And so I felt like I had to hide, because and this isn't like a small problem in the church. I mean, I'm I don't believe in God anymore. That's what's happening. And so, of course, many people have many different things to say about that. And so I pulled back. And, I thought, okay, maybe this is a season. Maybe I gotta, fast or pray or just seek God, which I did all of the above, did all of that. And, nothing happened. Nothing came from that. So I was like, well, I guess I gotta sit in this. So I kept going through life, and then there was a time where I I say I kept going through life. I kept going to church, kept even singing on the worship team. I kept, leading. And then there was a point where I just felt like a hypocrite. I was like, this isn't who I am. Like, this isn't where I'm actually at in life. I can't keep acting like I'm someone who believes in something that I don't. So I felt like I was just being a hypocrite. So I had to step down from absolutely everything. Step down from everything. Stop going to church, the whole deal. And then that took a huge weight off my shoulder. But still, everybody was like, what's going on? Where is he? What's happening? There's even people like, it's time for you to come back. It's time for you. And I'm like, yeah, man, like, you guys don't know. Like, you have no idea. And so I felt that it was necessary for those reasons to not only get out of that systematic mindset that I could have potentially taught myself, or whatever happened. I just know that is without a doubt, the way that I have thought my entire life. And whether that is a reoccurring theme in the people who have started to deconstruct religion or not, I'm not entirely aware of that. I'm not super sure of that. But that's what happened to me. And so I felt it necessary to bring to light, where I've been at, and for the reason being to get out of that systematic mindset that I was in, that I had to hide my pain and I had to wear this mask of happiness so that everybody thought I was okay. And then when I had a testimony of some sort to share, when everything was fixed, then I could, share it. And that's just not real life. That's not real. That's not living. That's just not real. And so for that reason, and also for the reason where, people were thinking that I was still somebody who I am not, and I didn't want to live life as a hypocrite. I don't want to live life as a lie. I want to live life in truth. I think that's everybody's desire. So I, brought to light all these things, and, I just, it is what it is. And it's weird that I had to do so on social media, because social media is such it's public now. It is a very public place, which is, it's tough because so many things can be so misinterpreted over Facebook, because I forget what the actual statistic or actual percentage is, but it's something like words are only like 10% of how we communicate. Yet the most public place, which has become social media, is how we mainly communicate to the public, which is just so skewed. But it is what it is. So I try in my words. I mean, I am a writer. I do write songs and I do write poetry and stuff. So I'm pretty good with my words, which is a good thing. So I put as much heart into that, statement of saying that I don't believe in God, as heartfelt as possible, so people would understand where I am coming from. And, so I got a lot of replies from that, a lot of mixed replies, a lot of love, some hate. I know the people that wrote those things wouldn't see them as hate, but I see them as hate, borderline. I know hate's a strong word, but okay, I'll say hate. I'll stick with hate, even though they don't see it that way. That's really what it is. And then I got a lot of private messages from people I went to ministry school with, saying, encouraging me, saying, like, you are so brave. You are so, like, how did you do that? I could never do that, but I have been in the same place, the same spot that you're at, and I'm afraid to tell my friends and family, and good on you for doing so. There was actually quite a bit of individuals that I met when I was at ministry school that wrote me, private messaged me, and said that. And I mean, it was astounding, because I'm like, okay, great. I'm not alone in this. I'm not totally crazy that I went to 3 years of this ministry school and then I've, come out of it and now I don't believe in God. So from there, some of the comments, where this is where the idea popped up, some of the comments Two that come to mind. One specifically, and I do two that come to mind, but I know that there was more than two that asked me, that said, you say you don't believe in God, but might you just consider that you don't believe in your idea of God? And so this made me think a little bit. And, my idea of God, when I look back at my life and I look back at all the systematic thinking I had, I was like, when it comes to philosophy and like self-revelations and theology, it was literally, and I'm not saying this to puff myself up or to be arrogant in any way, but for me and just the way that I am and the way that my mind works, that stuff is easy for me. It's just like, I don't know, like 2 + 2 = 4. And, that's simple, easy math. And I take something like joy and pain and it equals, life. It equals a paradox, but the paradox is life. And without joy or pain, we wouldn't have experience because it's the law of polarity. And it's like, I can just like go with thoughts like that, with taking two things that don't make any sense. I've just always been able in my mind to connect the dots, to make a bridge between these out of world thoughts that people are like, how did you even arrive at that? And I'm just like, I don't know, but it's easy for me. And so it's really is, I've been able to form this ideology, this philosophy, and this idea of who God is. And so the people that say, now but might you consider you don't believe in your idea of God? And to that I say, yes, I don't believe in my idea of God, but that idea was all that I had. That idea is now dead. Like did my ideas of God die? Yes. Is my ideas of God all I ever had? Yes. I did not know God outside of any ideas. The God that I knew was an idea. But when I look back on scriptures, when I even reading scriptures again, a year or two ago, just to like try to make sense of it all, it's like, even there's verses on philosophy and vain deceit. And people in that think, well, it's philosophy. It's talking about, Plato, Aristotle, modern day philosophers, William James, people who like to think. And I'm like, no, I don't think that's it at all. I mean, I think in that regard, there's two different sides to the spectrum of talking about philosophy and vain deceit, right? I think that verse is in Corinthians, and I'm going to have to double check about the context of that verse. But here's a thought that I have, and I don't think I'm not purposely, intentionally trying to relate it to the Bible verse. But here's what I think happens: is that philosophy, Christianity, Christians, people of religion, people who believe in God, can come up with a philosophy and a systematic way of thinking that they say, this is right. And anybody who thinks otherwise is wrong. And they get their own ideas about morality. They get their own ideas of what's good and bad, what's right and wrong, and how it corresponds and relates to the Bible. But it's all just knowledge and understanding. None of it is based off of experience. None of it is based off of actual encounters with a living God. And the same exact thing can be done on the opposite side of the spectrum with atheism. Atheists gather this systematic philosophical way of thinking of things that makes sense to them. And they say, this is what defines good and bad. This is what is morally right and wrong. They come up with a philosophy, same as Christians, that it's just, this is a systematic way of thinking that makes sense to me, that this is how I can live my life. They are both philosophies, and they can both be very deceitful and deceiving for one's life. And so I think, and this could very well be what the Bible verse is about. Cause I've had a lot of people ask me about this Bible verse. And yes, I've thought about it. I've gone back and read it. And I think the word that's used for philosophy is also the same word for like learning and sciences and knowledge. And it's pretty much all I'm talking about here, but I'd have to go back and actually check the context of the verse. But regardless of what that Bible verse in the context and all of that says, regardless, I think that this is still an essential thought that needs to be had, is that both sides of the spectrum, whether, like on the Richard Dawkins scale of belief, 1 to 7, 1 being, quote unquote, God exists, 7 being, quote unquote, that God does not exist. Both sides of the spectrum can gather their own philosophical ideology of this is God and this makes sense to me. And I would like to propose that needs to die. Both sides. It needs whether you think you're on the side that God does exist and you have this perfect systematic theology or philosophy that this is how God works. And so this is, even down to like something like hearing the voice of God. Well, I have a gut feeling and I can hear my conscience speaking to me. And it's like, okay, well, is that your conscience or is that you? The Christian would say, oh, well, I'm filled with the Holy Spirit. And so when I hear my conscience, it's influenced by the Holy Spirit. And so therefore that's God. And I hear it and I feel it in my being. And the atheist says, well, that's my conscience speaking to me because my conscience, the human conscience has evolved to a point where we are able to think for ourselves and we are intelligent beings. So that's not God, that's us. Now, which one is right? I don't know. We don't know. But I think both ideas that they have it right, and I think they both need to die. I think God, if it is an idea and philosophy, needs to die. And for me, I know it is dying and it has been dying and it's continuing to die. And it needs to, because I don't want to, not that I could even, because based off of my subjective ideas of what, I've come to, what belief is to me. I couldn't believe in God if I did not experience him. And I think belief comes from the knowledge that comes from experience. And that to me is like a definition for belief and how I would describe belief. And so, I don't think that this whole, all the philosophy, all this ideology and stuff needs to die. And for me, it's been dying. So to that comment, yes, like God, my idea of God has died. But my idea of God was all that I had. Like, I've never tasted the real thing. If there is such a thing, if God is real, I've never tasted the real thing. I've only tasted my ideology. I've only tested out my ideology and my own philosophy. And I want those things to die. And those things are dead. And so for me, I've read a little bit up on this new mental health disorder that's just popped up within the last, 5-10 years. Could have even been more recent than that. It's called religious trauma syndrome. And this is an actual thing that is studied more and more by doctors and psychologists or psychiatrists, therapists, whatever you call it. And that part of the religious trauma syndrome is that you go through a grieving period, like actual deep grief, because when you have this idea that God is with you, beside you, he's your friend, he is like a huge person in your life. You've created an idea that has become a person. And when that idea dies, therefore that person in your life dies. And for me, 3 years ago, that is exactly what happened to me. And that is exactly what I've been going through. I've been in a grieving process. God has been dying for me, and God died. And so it is that grieving process, but I'm like, if God does exist, I need my ideas, my philosophy. I need all of it to die. And because I want the real thing. And I can study up on a person all day long. I mean, this is just relationship 101. I can, hear about you, I can read about you and all of that. But until I meet you in person, I know nothing about you. And so I think the same thing goes for God. If he is a being that we can know on a personal level, which I do think if God exists, I do think we can know him on a personal level, because if God exists, if he created us, then I do think we have some sort of something in us that is that anything that I create, like it has a blueprint of me. And so if we were created by God, then we have some of his blueprint somewhere in us. And I only think and I think honestly that to get to know that blueprint, to get to know that part of God, is to get to know ourselves and to learn more about ourselves and be ourselves and love ourselves. And that's not to say that we are gods. I don't think that at all. But if God does exist, then I think that we get to know him the more we learn to embrace and accept ourselves. And that's an evolving idea with me. And that's not the end of the idea. But I do think that has something to do with discovering who God could be. And so, yeah, just going back to God, the idea of God needs to die. And when that idea dies, there's this unknown. And unknown, I mean, every fear, I've talked about this before, every fear can be boiled down to the fear of the unknown. And nobody likes unknowns. But here's the thing. There are going to be unknowns with God. If God exists, there are going to absolutely be unknowns. And if you don't learn to embrace those unknowns, if you don't learn to embrace those mysteries, then it's always going to result in religion. It's always going to result in you coming up with some sort of ideology, some sort of philosophy that you will serve as greater than yourself. And then when somebody disagrees with you or has a certain point, that can even be a good point, you're not going to listen to it because you've built up this ideology and philosophy that is your version of God, but that might not actually be who God actually is. And I've heard atheists say this. I've heard some agnostics say this. Even some Christians say this. Like, looking at the things that God did in the Old Testament, it's like, well, if that is God, then I want nothing to do with him. If God is real and, he, killed men, women, and children, like it says in the Old Testament, if God is this, if God is that, then I want nothing to do with that God. And if that's who God is, then he's an asshole. I've heard all of these things. Well, I got news for you. Those are ideas that you have of God, and those ideas might not be God at all. And I say that for the loving God, and I say that for the God that is all judgment and hellfire and brimstone. Like God, in regards to the God of the Bible, God was not sitting at a desk and he wrote the Bible himself. It's all been interpreted by other human beings that are no different than me and you. And people know this, but they say, okay, it was inspired by God and God chose them. Maybe, but could they have the interpretation wrong? I have absolutely no idea. But regardless, there are and I'm specifically talking about God in the Bible now. There are so many contradictions in the Bible to where it's like you have to experience yourself. I mean, people contradict themselves all day, all the time. It's just a thing that happens. And so, but when you know that person, when like truly know them based off of experience, not based off of learning or reading or any of that, but when you truly know that person, then you understand the paradoxes, then you understand the contradictions, then you understand, it's like, oh, this has to do with this and that has to do with that, and it's just a part of life. And so I think any person that, reads the Bible specifically, and comes up with these ideas of God based off of one in particular verse, whether it be in the New Testament or Old Testament, that's an idea that needs to die. Who says that is God? And the same thing for talking about a God that is not a part of the Bible at all. Any philosophy or idea of him can just turn into a religion. And that's, honestly, I think that's how you get the New Age religion, that it has to look a certain way. New Age is a bit more experimental, is a bit more spiritual than just typical normal Christianity. But I still think that if you have this idea of something that works, something that is like, this is how it works 100% of the time, the only thing that I would say that I see that fits the context of what I see, not even of a biblical God, but a God in general, would be that 100% of the time it is is a God. God is a God of love. And that's the only consistent thing I see in that. But if you look at love and how inconsistent and how paradoxical love is, then maybe you can understand a bit more about God and who he is. And to really understand love, you have to experience love. You can study the philosophy of love all day, but until you live it out, until you fall in love, until you experience the pain of love, until you experience the joy of love, you'll never truly understand love. And I think it's the same exact way for God and for religion. I think all those ideas need to die. And I know that mine did. Essentially God died for me. God is dead. And I think that's a good thing. I think that, to really know and to really embrace God, if he exists, and goes on the path that I've been taking for, spirituality and meditation. There's a lot of other practices inside of that. There's many different ways that you could go about it. But yeah, that's the route I've been taking, and it's proving benefit to me in my life. I haven't gotten, to a point where I've experienced any absolute insane, left my body or gone into a vision or anything like that. There's a part of me that's waiting for that to happen, but there's also another part of me that wants to embrace life fully. I thought about this the other day, on my, podcast about experiencing the simulation theory. The other day I was thinking about that whole, experience, that whole episode, I should say, that whole episode for me. I realized how important it is to be grounded in this reality. And I keep realizing that more and more and more, even as I've continued to meditate and continued to practice things of spirituality, getting in tune with myself, getting in tune with the present moment, and getting in tune with the unknown. Not having any sort of label for it, but just embracing that unknown. It is so unbelievably important to embrace this realm, to embrace the things of science, to embrace the things of this material reality. And I think that if something greater than this does exist, if you do not learn to fully embrace this reality, I think that it can be super destructive to yourself. And I don't think that anybody who leaves this reality behind in search of another one can really connect and communicate with the world at large. And I've seen that happen to a lot of spiritual people, even that they want to disconnect from this reality and go into another one. And I'm like, cool, if that's real, but how are you going to relate to the people you love? How are you going to show love to the people who aren't there yet? So, yeah, a little side trail, little side rant. But I think my main point in this, besides, God dying and our ideas of God that need to die is honestly to embrace mystery, and that what that looks like in everyday life, in relationship to a spiritual path, in relationship to finding God, if he does exist, is letting your ideas, letting your philosophies, letting your ideology, letting all that die and truly embracing the unknown. And just admitting that, these things, all of these things could be wrong. And that is terrifying to some people. That's absolutely terrifying to some people. But I think, I heard it best from one of my buddies who I'm going to have him, on one of these podcasts pretty soon. He said, his name's Matt Palmer. He's incredible, and you guys are going to love the podcast that he's, going to be on. It's gonna be like super long. It's gonna be like 3 hours, and we're just gonna rip apart the universe and the supernatural and the natural and all sorts of stuff. It's gonna be great. But something that he told me, is, I think it's in a book that he read. I'm unaware of the book. I just remember how he said it was that, when you, live specifically as a Christian life, when you go to the cross, your ideas of God have also got to go to the cross. When the Bible talks a lot about dying to self, which I'm all for that principle of dying to self. But when you truly die to self, all of your ideas of God also have to die for you to truly experience who God is. And so, there's a number of different ways that, there's a number of different practical ways, that you can let your ideas die and your philosophies and ideologies die of God. But it's totally subjective. So I'm just going to leave that up to you. Now, finally, I just want to say, I'm talking bad, sort of, about philosophy, about, different ideologies, about studying and learning. Well, I'm not talking bad about it. I'm just saying in relationship to God, and having, this becoming God, for you. Because really what that does is it fuels disappointment. It fuels, the heart deferred makes the hope deferred makes the heart grow sick. A proverb in the Bible that I believe is a principle that is definitely applied in life. That hope deferred makes the heart grow sick. I think that hope starts to become deferred when we start to gather our ideas of God, that aren't working out and that aren't sound, and they're not bettering ourselves or the people around us. And so I think in relationship to God, in like philosophy and theology and things like that, all that stuff just needs to die. Now, I do, there is a point to studying. There is a point to learning. There is a point to having a grounding in certain ideas. Love your neighbor as yourself. Again, a biblical principle that I think that's a great principle to have. The heart, hope deferred makes the heart grow sick. A principle like that. Or there is no fear in love. Yes, all of these are biblical principles. They're principles that I grew up on, and they're principles that I keep with me because I do think that they apply to real life, and they have really helped me out in real life, even after me coming to this point of not believing in God. And the thing I like about those principles specifically is they are hollow. And what I mean by that is that they can be applied to specific situations, and not just that, but they can be applied to very subjective situations. It's an objective, objective statement in principle, in concept, but when applied is very subjective. And I think that's why they work. I think they work because it's like this hollow shell. And then when you apply it to a situation, when you place that hollow shell on a situation, then the situation begins to work itself out and begins to make more sense. I think in coming up with grounding principles for life, I think they need to be hollow principles that can be applied to everyone in everyday life. Like when applied, to any situation. They can be applied to very subjective situations as well, but they're objective principles. So just a random thought I had, but thought I'd share it, just because it's, it's really how I do these podcasts. I don't have anything written down. I just basically talk for however long I talk. So I let my mind just go. So yeah. But yeah, seriously, embracing the mystery, embracing that, in regards to God. There is a point to philosophy. There is a point to, theology and ideas and metaphysics and neuroscience and, wow, I just totally lost whatever therapist study, psychology. There we go. There's a point to all of it. But in regards to applying these points to God, I think that I don't think that's good. I don't think that's good. And I think that those ideas need to die. In other words, I think that God, for a lot of us, I know for me, he did, still going through the grieving process, honestly. But it needs to die. Needs to die. And I think it's a good thing, because when our ideas of God dies, if God exists, I think once we make room, once we get rid of our ideas and philosophies of who God is and we make room, I think God might show up after that. And that's what I try to do. That's what I try to create room for. And that's not to say I believe in him or I believe that he is going to show up. But if you guys know me, I want to live by truth. And, if God is real and if he is truth, then I want to know that. So I got to create opportunities for that to take place, or else I just become cynical and stubborn. And, yeah, it's, I don't think that's good for anybody. So I make room for experiences where experiences might take place. So that's really it for today, guys. Really hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you're listening to this on YouTube and you got all the way through this podcast, congratulations and thank you. Make sure to leave a comment. And if you're just listening to this podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts, be sure to, I'd love to know your thoughts. Hit me up on Instagram, nate.alger. And, I'd love to know your thoughts. Love to have these conversations. And so, yeah, that's it, guys. Remain skeptical and, remain active. I don't know. Take that as you will. All right, guys. I will see you in the next one. Peace.